Hi everybody, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're having a good week, a safe week. I want to do a video discussing Tar Baby by Toni Morrison. I really enjoyed this. I was utterly fascinated by it. I finished reading it this evening. And it's a deceptively challenging book. It's marvelously written, as any Toni Morrison book is, but it's deceptively challenging. It feels like almost unique in Morrison's body of work because of how it seems to be part of sort of that realist school of novels, stretching back to Henry James, Gustave Flaubert, but even more, within Morrison's own time, her contemporaries, writers like John Updike. It feels like it's in that tradition of novels, and not quite in the almost like mythical type books she writes with Beloved or Song of Solomon, which maybe has some magical realism. And so that's going on, but it's a romance, but it's a romance that inverts a lot of our ideas around romance, is what I found. A lot of times we think of romance as sort of in sort of two traditions. One is the first meeting and the realization, the epiphany by moonlight of love, and this silver orb and this silvery silhouette, and it's just this singular moment. Or the other one is sort of the sunrise, the new dawn breaking, this idea that nothing will ever be the same, that love as a change is going to transform everything, and it is a new dawn, a new life, really. And those are sort of these two ideas within romance. And I think what Morrison does is invert both of those, that it is not just the silvery orb of the moon, but rather the dark blanket of the sky that orb exists in, and all of the shadows that exist in the darkness, outside of the moonlight, outside of that silhouette. And then by day, the sun, it's not just the sunlight in this new dawn, but it's rather the heat that comes with the sun. This idea that, if the sun is that bright and that warm, it's going to make you sweat a little bit. that love is a type of change within our minds and in our hearts, and just as any type of physical change is going to incur toil and sweat, well, that mental and emotional change is also going to cause discomfort. There's going to be some sweat and discomfort there, and I think that's the side of romance Morrison's interested in this book. And it's fascinating. But she also then is going to, I said it was kind of in this realist tradition. I think she also interrogates some of the ideas of romance, and specifically the transactional nature of romance. This idea that, wealth can make a romance successful because we can just buy each other things. The materialism of both what I find, in reading realist novels, the materialism that's there in these just long, airy descriptions of just all the stuff that everybody has in their houses or in their cars or boats. And that transactional materialistic nature of romance, that not just wealth, but even this idea of you marry someone who's educated. In a sense, the unspoken, inference there is that because being educated will allow you to become more wealthy, and then you can buy all this stuff. And Morrison, to a certain degree, is going to interrogate it and push on that. But it is a Toni Morrison book, so there's just fantastic writing. And I want to give an example of that I think also sort of reveals some of the themes within the book. So the main character, Eugene, has gotten out of a car that ran out of gas in a jungle on an island. It's set primarily on an island of the Caribbean, and she steps down and gets into some mud, quicksand, and is now holding onto a tree to stay alive. The young tree sighed and swayed. The women looked down from the rafters of the trees and stopped murmuring. There aren't actual women there. They were delighted when first they saw her, thinking a runaway child had been restored to them. But upon looking closer, they saw differently. This girl was fighting to get away from them. The women hanging from the trees were quiet now, but arrogant, mindful as they were of their value, their exceptional femaleness, knowing as they did that the first world of the world had been built with their sacred properties, that they alone could hold together the stones of the pyramids and the rushes of Moses' crib, knowing their steady consistency, their pace of glaciers, their permanent embrace. They wondered at the girl's desperate struggle down below to be free, to be something other than they were. And And so we think of her, she seems to be stuck in this. And that last sentence about desperately trying to be free, Eugene is going to be revealed to be trying to break through the expectations that many people have for her. Her aunt and uncle who raised her, who are black servants to a wealthy retired white family, and were their servants in Philadelphia. The expectations of that wealthy white couple who have paid for her education, and she is now a successful model in Paris, and they've sort of set her up. So their expectations, her own expectations of sort of that modeling world, and the romances she's had in it, and the her friends in New York City, their expectations. She's trying to sort of break free of all of those and find her own self, her own identity. And so that's there as this thematic piece. But we also now have this really interesting idea of like quicksand is usually dangerous. Mud is like, it sticks to you. It's unpleasant and it has to be cleaned out. But as soon as we put in this piece about holding the pyramids together, or Moses' crib, we now realize that idea of tar or mud, rather than being something that soils and stains, it saves Moses' life. It's not just rushes tied together, but the rushes then have, pitch put on them so that they'll seal and Moses can safely float in the book of Exodus. That the ark in Genesis has to be sealed with the tar. And so there, there's also this really interesting idea of tar, and this idea of darkness always is this idea of stain. And the racism, of course, of Tar Baby within the southeastern United States, and the not just slavery, but Jim Crow. And now Morrison's taking that and inverting that darkness and the mud as something that is good and a beneficial piece. All while, of course, Eugene is potentially going to die in the quicksand there. And so it's just it's a fascinating little paragraph. It's a window into that. But within the setting on that island, I mentioned, much of it is set on that island. We get sort of this family drama, that social drama, that realism, where it's not unlike Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf by Edward Albee, or Long Day's Journey into Night by Eugene O'Neill, where you have people together in a claustrophobic setting, and then everything boils over. And I had mentioned that there's sort of the older couple who are there, their older servants, Eugene who's there, and then there is, of course, the outsider, the interloper's son, who comes in as the agent of change, not necessarily intentionally, but just as this agent of change, and essentially is going to shake up everything and reveal all of the shame, the guilt, the resentment that has festered among the different relationships that exist here for decades. It becomes clear. Morrison, uses narration to reveal some of those, but then it all comes to a burst at a dinner, and she foreshadows it in a really beautiful way, where the retired white industrialist candy magnate, Valerian, he has built a greenhouse, but no wind is allowed in. And so some of the plants have never bloomed because there's no wind to like shake the buds to cause them to, either fall off or to burst into bloom. And so sun comes in and casually like flicks the buds on one of the plants, and there's this sense of, okay, now they will either bloom or they will fall off and die. And that, of course, is a metaphor for all of these individuals and their relationships across this novel. That Sun, as this agent of change, he's African American. He was on a ship, and he'd committed a crime back in the U.S., so he's kind of been on the run for 8 years. He just decides he's tired of the ship one day, dives off, and ends up stowing away on a boat and arriving at this island, where he secretly sulks about just taking food, and gradually now, after he's revealed, and of course scares the daylights out of some characters, certainly entertains Valerian, who seems bored and needs the butt of his life rattled. And it is going to, sort of awaken all and allow all of these resentments and emotions to now pour out. And among those are, as we had said, Jadine is trying to figure out who she's going to be. She and Sun have a year-long romance across the, much of the rest of the novel. And we see, again, all of the sweat that it creates in their lives, all of the toil that change can involve, and sort of that question of, are people capable of change? Are adults who are in their 20s or 30s, or as the older characters are in their 50s, 60s, can they break free from the ossified constrictions that their lives, their choices, their society have placed around them, and grow and become more full humans and embrace humanity more fully? And so we then end up with that relationship, Morrison presenting sort of two different paths. And one she allows to be interrogated very thoroughly by Sun, and the other she uses Sun's character to interrogate. So Sun is going to question that, as I said, that transactional nature of relationships, but we also then see his alternative as there's abuse, there's violence within the relationship between he and Jadine, and so Morrison very clearly shows like that's not good either. Like, that's awful. But here's what Sun has to say about the relation, this transactional nature. Sun's mouth went dry as he watched Valerian chewing a piece of ham, his head of a coin profile content, approving even of the flavor in his mouth, although he had been able to dismiss with a flutter of the fingers the people whose sugar and cocoa had allowed him to grow old in regal comfort, although he had taken the sugar and cocoa and paid for it as though it had no value, as though the cutting of cane and picking of beans was child's play and had no value. But he turned it into candy, the invention of which really was child's play, and sold it to other children and made a fortune in order to move near, but not in the midst of, the jungle where the sugar came from, and build a palace with more of their labor, and then hire them to do more of the work he was not capable of, and pay them again according to some scale of value that would outrage Satan himself. Because they were thieves, and nobody knew thieves and thievery better than he did, and he probably thought he was a law-abiding man. They all did, and they all always did, because they had not the dignity of wild animals, who did not eat where they defecated, but they could defecate over a whole people. And so that's where we see Sun questioning, that materialism, that transactional nature of relationships, that Valerian thinks he kind of can tell everybody what to do and rule everybody because he pays them, and he's selfish, and that his wealth gives him that authority. It gives him the authority within his marriage with his wife. It gives him the authority with the couple who are their servants. It gives him a sense of authority over Jadine, whose education he's paid for. And Sun sees all of the compromises everyone has made and how none of them are truly happy. And so it's just, that there really is this extended questioning of the idea of romance and of what we should be striving for in romance. And it's fascinating. But it's also, this is Toni Morrison, there's also that really cool, strange, magical stuff going on. So let's talk about that. Sun asked who were the blind race, so Gideon told him a story about a race of blind people descended from some slaves who went blind the minute they saw Dominique, the island. A fisherman's tale, he said. The island where the rich Americans lived is named for them, he said. Their ship foundered and sank with Frenchmen, horses, and slaves aboard. The blinded slaves could not see how or where to swim, so they were at the mercy of the current and the tide. They floated and trod water and ended up on that island along with the horses that had swum ashore. Some of them were only partially blinded and were rescued later by the French and returned to Queen of France and indenture. The others, totally blind, hid. The ones who came back had children who, as they got on into middle age, went blind too. What they saw with the eye of the mind, and that, of course, was not to be trusted. And Sun asks, what happened to the ones who hid on the island? Were they ever caught? No, man, still there, said Gideon. They ride those horses all over the hills. They learn to ride through the rainforest, avoiding all sorts of trees and things. They race each other, and for sport they sleep with the swamp women in Saint-Deville. Just before a storm you can hear them way over here. Sounds like thunder, he said. And Sun asked, seriously, did anybody ever see one of them? No, and they can't stand for sighted people to look at them without their permission. No telling what they'll do if they know you saw them. We thought you was one, said Therese. And that's this whole idea. They're all convinced that Sun is one of these blind, magical horsemen riding through the jungle and rainforest. And of course that goes, They can't stand for sighted people to look at them without their permission. No telling what they'll do if they know you saw them. And they're all thinking that it's these mythical horsemen, blind horsemen, who are the dangers. But in reality, it's the idea that we're all, and all these characters in this book are moving around, in a sense, blind. You know, they're guided only by certain true, like, lodestones in their hearts. Like, what is it that they're after? What is it that pushes them? Their impetus. Is it this, like, compromise? What are they compromising in order to attain whatever that single mind's eye, like, goal is? And once that's revealed, what will they do? Once the shame and the guilt and the resentment, and there are some truly horrifying things that are revealed in here. Once that's revealed, what will everybody do? Will they find a way to sort of just settle back down and, you know, kind of become this dormant plant? Or will they burst and have their lives transformed and changed? And I really think that's where Morrison's going with this, but I might be totally wrong. I mentioned a number of books that came to mind. I did want to read one more piece. This is from Marcus Garvey, a speech he gave on emancipation in Liberty Hall. If humanity is regarded as made up of the children of God, and God loves all humanity, we all know that, then God will be more pleased with that race that protects all humanity than with the race that outrages the children of God. And I really think that's where Morrison's going with this idea of questioning, you know, materialism, questioning the social structures that have trapped so many, and trapped many in poverty, and trapped others who seem to be well off in these almost like coffin-like lives that fundamentally begin to lack agency. As I said, I was fascinated by this. It's marvelous. But let me know what you think. Well, let me know what your thoughts are on this book. I truly would love to learn what others think about Tar Baby. I thought it was great. Some books that came to mind, of course, I don't see how Morrison writes the book if she's not an editor, reading all of the sort of those contemporary books, or books pastiching from, that are pastiches of contemporary books that, you know, that feel like those sort of 70s, 80s, post-World War II general literature within the United States. This feels like she's taking all of those on and saying, okay, here's the next step forward in this type of novel. I'm going to do it for you. But also, you know, can we do even more than this? That's what this feels like. The Bluest Eye feels like that too. They both feel like books that she writes from her days as an editor, seeing gaps in the fiction landscape before her. I think there's a number of parallels between Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. I read that last February. I read The Bluest Eye last July, I believe. And specifically, Jadine sort of parallels Janie Crawford, and Sun parallels Tea Cake in a number of ways. And this is a fantastic book. The claustrophobia of the island reminded me of, and sort of the danger, reminded me of Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys. I love this book. This is a fantastic one. Also, The Sea by Iris Murdoch. And there's a real sense in which Jadine and Sun experience many of the conflicts that Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet do in Pride and Prejudice. This sense of each of them being, you know, questioning whether they're willing to change for the other, and whether they're willing to change for love, and whether they can. And also, there's a huge amount of dialogue. I mentioned, you know, that feels the realist. There's a huge amount of dialogue, as there is in all of Jane Austen's novels, where so much of the action is just told through characters' words. And then, of course, I had said there's a sense in which Morrison is sort of taking on and advancing works by writers like John Updike or John Cheever, but also those brutal family dramas like Long Day's Journey into Night by Jean O'Neill, or Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf by Edward Albee. But again, there's no writer quite like Toni Morrison, and Tar Baby was an excellent read. So let me know what you think. Thank you.